Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about not being in front of the computer in order to work as a programmer. So let's get into it. So I had a very interesting question today, I thought. Basically the question in question was, Frederick, why can some programmers say that they don't have to be in front of the computer in order to be working? And that's, I suppose, a fair question. So I will try to answer this. The first thing that I can think of is that good old compilation joke. There's a comic strip about that, a few famous comic strip about this, where basically if you need to recompile the whole system and you're working in a really large system, then you can pretty much go and have a coffee depending on how big the project is. Some projects take like a few seconds to compile if they're small. Some take a few minutes depending on language and size and so forth. And some can take, the longest compilation times can be up towards, you mean half an hour in a really worst case, maybe even more than that. I have never seen anything worse than that, but I don't see why it wouldn't be possible for something to be even worse. But I hope that these things are a little bit rarer. At least I really do so, because that's a lot of wasted time in compilation time. That's definitely a sign that you should be splitting things up in my world. But that is something that can absolutely happen. And compilation is basically that you have source code or code written in some programming language that needs a compiler in order to run on a computer. And in order for you to be able to run your program, you need to compile it. You need a compiler, which is just another program that goes through your code and compiles it down to code that can be executed in the computer, right? You need that process to take place. It's kind of like, you can imagine it very similar to copying a really large file into a new directory. The computer is going to work super hard in order to move that file from one place to the other, and the compiler is very similar sort of thing. You can't really do all that much when this is happening. Well, you could if you have a strong computer, but odds are that the process of compilation might actually just take longer. So many times it's just more efficient. You just kind of let it, don't do anything else that is kind of heavy or anything like that. And changing files when you're actually compiling the code isn't going to help you all that much either, because the compiler is right now in the process of moving all this code over to something that can run on the computer, which means that changing that file might cause other issues. The program might not compile correctly, or the program will just have inconsistent code with what you have, and you might just have to recompile things. Luckily enough, it's not usually the case that you have to recompile an entire system. You can just recompile certain files or files that you have changed, if you're lucky. But that's not the fun answer, I would say. There's another answer that I think is more interesting, and that is that there is this idea sometimes, I would say, not just in software development, but by people who don't really understand the process of creation when it comes to pretty much anything. And that is this idea that you have this, you believe that the work that should be happening is happening when you see the person who is working in the context that your mental picture is telling you that this is now a person who is working. As an example, if you, a painter or an artist, you believe that they are working really only while they're in front of their canvas and drawing something, actually doing something. But the actuality of the situation is that that's just one part of the process of creating a painting. Other things that are necessary is this loose or very undefinable term, inspiration, or reflection, and having basically a thought process that allows you to create the thing in the first place. And as a software developer, most of what you do, you think that for sure you will write a lot of code. That's not in discussion, that's not a question here, that you're definitely going to write a lot of code. But I think that quite a lot of people may underestimate how much time you will spend doing other things as well, where it comes into things such as understanding stakeholders, talking to people, understanding specifications, trying to figure out a complicated problem, or trying not necessarily a complicated problem, it's just that you have multiple solutions to the same problem and you need to pick something. And in that sort of scenario, it's actually very useful for you to just have a sit down with another coworker and do a bit of rubber ducking, and you kind of go back and forth and you explain, okay, I'm thinking we could do this or that and so forth, and the coworker goes and says, yeah, that could be a solution, but we could also do that. And then you kind of consider, like you talk through what the different things, what the different options are. And this is not just in software development, this is just generally good practice. When you have multiple people working on a project, or creative people of any sort, this collaboration is extremely important. It's not only important for the enhanced understanding you build off of each other's ideas, but it's also a very important thing to do in order to share knowledge between each other. Because the fact of the matter is that if you're going to work as a team, the most important thing for you is that you have a joint understanding of what direction you're going. Because if people are running all across the place and they have different opinions or different ideas on what needs to be done, you're going to end up with a much worse project, or like a much worse process just in general. It's similar to a football team. You have strategies and game plans and so forth for this exact purpose, so that the players know what part in this machinery of people they're going to play. And that doesn't require you necessarily to have a computer. An example that where I think the longest time I've spent coding or like programming, being paid as a programmer without actually writing a single line of code was about, well, let's call it 3 days, because I can't remember exactly now, but it's roughly 3 days. And those 3 days were basically just spent, and now I could have counted like all meetings and stuff like that, but I'm like just counting things that are not meeting related, because that's a different story. But I spent roughly 3 days with another coworker in a small room with a whiteboard, where we basically were like, our job was pretty much to figure out an algorithm that could solve an extremely complicated problem for the company. And this is like, it's such a theoretical problem, and it's so extremely hard that we actually had to sit and pretty much just design the approach for how to solve this problem in a theoretical fashion before anybody did any coding, because it was such a complicated problem that starting to code would have just ended in complete disaster. You needed to have a plan for how to structure this, because this was the level of complexity that this had. So what I want you to take away from this is that when a programmer says that they don't always have to be in the computer to work, one thing that they can be saying is that pretty much, the simple one is that the compiler is running. In other words, there's a program executing something that needs to happen before you can actually continue your work. But it's more likely that they're referring to the fact that code is written up here. It has nothing to do with the computer. Is just the way that you execute it. You can be in a meeting room where you can have a discussion with stakeholders or another coworker in order to actually figure out what you're going to do when you go back to the computer. And this process is the same for anybody who is a creative type of person who needs to come up with new ideas in order to solve some type of issue. You may think that the important stuff is happening when you're actually sitting at the computer, and the productive thing, the output of what you have up here is definitely happening. But don't forget that there's a process to being able to write those lines of code, and that process usually involves quite a lot of thinking. Have a great day.